The sun beat down on the desolate land, leaching moisture from the air, from the cracked earth, from Alara's lips. Hours, or perhaps days, had bled together since the riders came. The stillness now was a different kind of terror from the chaos before, thick with the smell of dust and something coppery and final. She lay crumpled near the remains of the wagon, the wood splintered like gnawed bone, the canvas ripped to ribbons. Her head throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, and a deeper pain, raw and gut-deep, resonated with the silence that had fallen over the place where her life had been. They were gone. All of them. The easy rhythm of their journey, the quiet presence of her father, the hopeful anticipation of a new town, a new life, all swept away in a brutal, swift tide. She was just left, a solitary scrap against the immensity of the sky and the indifference of the land. Fear was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest, making each shallow breath a struggle. She scanned the horizon through gritty eyes, expecting another shape to emerge, another threat to materialize from the shimmering heat haze. But there was nothing, only the empty distance mocking her isolation. A small cut on her arm stung, a minor wound amidst the wreckage, but it felt monumental, a testament to her vulnerability. She had no water, no food, no means of protection. Just the tattered remains of her dress and the crushing realization of her utter helplessness. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in harsh oranges and purples that seemed too vibrant for such a scene of death and ruin. The temperature dropped, and the wind picked up, a mournful, whistling sound that carried no comfort. It tugged at her hair, at the torn fabric of her clothes, as if trying to pull her apart, scatter her to the winds like everything else. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at the edges of her mind. She couldn't stay here, but where could she go? Every direction seemed equally daunting, leading only into more unknown emptiness. Curl up and wait for the end? The thought was tempting, a surrender to the exhaustion and despair that threatened to engulf her. But something stubborn, a tiny ember of defiance that had survived the fire, flickered within her. Her father had taught her to be strong, to face hardship with a clear eye. This felt beyond anything he could have prepared her for, yet his quiet resilience echoed in her memory. She shifted, testing her limbs. They were stiff, aching but functional. Survival instinct, buried deep, began to assert itself, a primal urge to simply endure. She needed water, shelter from the biting night chill, and she needed to move. But the courage to stand, to face the vast, indifferent world alone, seemed a mountain too high to climb. She watched the stars begin to appear, cold pinpricks in the deepening blue, feeling smaller and more insignificant than she ever had before. It was in this moment of utter loneliness, wrapped in the shroud of night, that she saw it, a faint glow in the distance, barely visible against the dark line of the horizon. A campfire, or something else? Hope, fragile and dangerous, stirred within her, quickly followed by a fresh wave of fear. Who would be out here? Friend or foe? The world had shown her its cruelty, its capacity for sudden, inexplicable violence. Yet, the alternative was certain death by exposure or thirst. Hesitantly, cautiously, she pushed herself to a sitting position, her muscles protesting. The glow remained, unwavering. It was a sign of life, however distant, however uncertain. She was drawn to it, a moth to a flame, the instinct for survival overriding the terror of the unknown. The journey would be slow, perilous, but the thought of staying put, waiting for the sun to rise on the same scene of devastation, was unbearable. With a quiet, determined breath, she began to crawl forward, inch by agonizing inch, towards the distant, enigmatic light. She crawled towards the light through the remaining hours of the night, the ground rough beneath her hands and knees. The glow grew steadily, resolving itself into the warm, flickering heart of a small fire. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky in soft pastels that starkly contrasted with the harsh landscape, she could make out the shape of a solitary figure seated by the flames. He was large, still, wrapped in a worn blanket or coat, facing away from her towards the rising sun. She stopped, hidden behind a low rise of rock, her heart hammering against her ribs. Every instinct screamed caution. After what she had endured, any human presence felt like a potential threat. Yet, the sheer exhaustion, the thirst that clawed at her throat, the desperate need for respite outweighed the fear. She watched him for a long time, searching for any sign of menace in his posture or movement. He didn't stir, didn't look around. He was just there, a solid, unmoving presence in the vast emptiness. Finally, driven by necessity, she pushed herself to her feet, wincing at the protest of her stiff muscles. She took a shaky step, then another, her eyes fixed on the figure. She made no sound, yet as she cleared the rise and began the slow, uneven walk towards him, his head turned. Slowly, deliberately, he looked directly at her. He was a man of the land, weathered and hard-featured. A thick beard obscured the lower half of his face, and a low-brimmed hat shadowed his eyes. He held himself with a quiet power and stillness that spoke of watchfulness. He didn't speak, just watched her approach, his gaze unreadable. Her own fear must have been plain on her face, in her hesitant steps, in the way she clutched at her torn dress. When she was still some distance away, too weak to close the gap quickly, he finally moved. He didn't stand or reach for a weapon. Instead, he gestured towards the fire with a single, slow sweep of his hand. The gesture was uninviting, devoid of warmth, yet it was also not a rejection. It was simply an acknowledgement, an offer of space by the fire, nothing more. She understood. It was an invitation born of necessity, not kindness. Two souls adrift, finding temporary harbor in the same harsh sea. She reached the fire, her legs trembling. She sank to the ground opposite him, wrapping her arms around herself, feeling the meager warmth seep into her chilled bones. She didn't speak, couldn't find the words anyway. She focused on the fire, on the simple fact of its existence, of its heat. He still said nothing. After a time, he reached for a tin cup and a battered canteen beside him. He poured water into the cup and, without looking at her, extended it across the fire towards her. His hand was large, calloused. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, a lingering thread of wariness. But the thirst was a burning ache. She reached out and took the cup. Her hand trembled as she raised it to her lips, the water cool and life-giving. She drank slowly, savoring each drop, feeling her body begin to reawaken. When she finished, she held the cup out to him. He took it, his fingers brushing hers briefly. There was no warmth in the touch, no recognition of her as anything more than a creature in need. He simply refilled the cup and set it back down beside him. The silence stretched between them, not entirely comfortable, but not overtly hostile either. It was a neutral space, occupied by two strangers bound together by chance and the unforgiving landscape. She risked a glance at him. His eyes, partially visible beneath the hat brim, seemed to hold a depth of solitude that mirrored her own, a profound weariness that transcended simple fatigue. He was not offering comfort, not offering salvation. He was simply present, and in that moment, presence felt like a miracle. The man, Silas, as she learned his name through a few gruff, necessary exchanges, remained a figure of quiet enigma. They traveled together, not by explicit agreement, but by unspoken necessity. He was heading vaguely west, and the west was the only direction that felt like moving away from the horror she had left behind. He didn't ask her name at first, nor did he pry into her past. His questions were practical. Can you walk? Are you hurt bad? You got any water left? His observations were equally sparse, usually relating to the land or the weather. Alara, still raw from her loss and wary of any human connection, found herself grateful for his reserve. It allowed her space to breathe, to simply exist without the burden of explanation or forced sympathy. He was a man of action, not words. He knew the land with an intimacy that was both impressive and slightly intimidating. He could read the subtle signs in the dust, predict the weather by the feel of the air, find water in places that looked utterly barren. He moved with a quiet competence, setting a steady pace that pushed her to her limits but never broke her. When she faltered, he didn't offer a hand or words of encouragement. He would simply stop, wait patiently until she caught her breath, then resume walking. There were no shared meals around the fire, no easy companionship. He ate his meager rations and she ate hers, the space between them a silent boundary. Yet, in subtle ways, his watchfulness was apparent. He always took the night watch, sitting silent and still by the fire while she slept fitfully nearby. He would leave a full canteen near her head in the morning. He cleaned and rebandaged her cut arm with rough efficiency, his touch impersonal but careful. It was in these small, practical acts, devoid of any expectation or sentiment, that she began to see past his stoic exterior. He wasn't kind in the way she understood kindness, but he was capable, dependable in a world that felt utterly unreliable. He was a lifeline, offered without flourish or fanfare. Her initial fear of him slowly began to dissipate, replaced by a grudging respect, and then a fragile sense of safety. She started to notice details, the lines etched around his eyes, the worn leather of his gloves, the way he handled his rifle with practiced ease. He was a man who had clearly seen hardship, perhaps known loss himself. That shared understanding, unspoken and unacknowledged, became a silent bond between them. The landscape remained a constant antagonist, vast, relentless, beautiful in its cruelty. Dust storms would sweep in without warning, stinging their eyes and filling their mouths with grit. The sun was a malevolent eye in the sky during the day, and the nights could turn surprisingly cold. They were two small figures against an immense, uncaring backdrop, their survival dependent on their own resilience and Silas's quiet expertise. One evening, as they huddled by a small fire, the wind howling around them, Elara finally spoke about what had happened. The words came haltingly at first, a painful trickle, then a flood of grief and horror. Silas listened, his gaze fixed on the flames. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes. When she finished, the silence returned, heavy with the weight of her story. She expected him to say something, anything, but he remained silent, simply acknowledging her pain with his presence. And strangely, that was enough. It wasn't comfort, but it was acceptance. He saw her vulnerability, her brokenness, and didn't flinch away. He simply let her be. As the days wore on, her physical strength returned, albeit slowly. More importantly, her spirit, battered but not broken, began to mend. The raw wound of grief was still there, a constant ache, but it no longer paralyzed her. Necessity had forced her to keep moving, and movement had become a form of healing. She watched Silas, learning from his quiet efficiency, his unwavering focus. He was a survivor, and by simply existing alongside him, she was surviving too. Their journey was not towards a specific destination, but simply forward, away from the past, into an uncertain future they would face together, two quiet shadows against the vast, indifferent land. Their path led them towards a narrow canyon, a potential shortcut through the rugged terrain, but also a natural choke point. As they approached, a sense of unease settled over Elara. The air felt heavy, too still. Silas stopped, holding up a hand. His body tensed, his gaze scanning the canyon entrance. He didn't say anything, but his posture communicated caution, a heightened awareness. She felt it too, the prickle of danger on her skin, the instinctive urge to retreat. Then they saw them. 3 figures emerging from the shadow of the canyon wall, silhouetted against the sun. Raiders, the same kind who had destroyed her life. Fear, cold and sharp, lanced through her, immediate and visceral. Her breath hitched. This was it. The end she had narrowly escaped before. Silas remained still for a moment longer, assessing the threat. The raiders saw them, and a harsh cry echoed across the rocks. They spurred their horses forward. Silas moved then, swift and decisive. He pushed Elara behind a cluster of boulders, pressing her low to the ground. "Stay down. Don't move." His voice was low, rough, utterly without fear. He drew his rifle, his movements fluid and practiced. He didn't take cover but positioned himself between her and the approaching figures, a shield of flesh and bone. Alara watched, heart pounding, the terror a suffocating blanket. But beneath the fear, a new feeling stirred, a fierce determination not to be a helpless victim again. She couldn't fight with a rifle, but she could watch, could listen. She could stay out of his way. The raiders bore down on them, yelling, brandishing weapons. Silas raised his rifle. The shot cracked through the air, loud and final in the stillness. One of the horses went down, screaming. The rider was thrown. Another shot, and the second raider reined in sharply, his horse rearing. The third hesitated, startled by the sudden, deadly resistance. Silas reloaded with practiced speed. The raiders, expecting easy prey, were clearly surprised by the solitary man's lethal efficiency. The second raider turned to flee, but Silas's third shot was true. He slumped forward on his horse. The third raider, seeing his companions fall so quickly, hesitated for only a second longer before turning his horse and galloping back into the canyon, disappearing as quickly as he had appeared. The silence returned, broken only by the pained sounds of the downed horse and the wind whistling through the rocks. Alara stayed low, trembling, but her eyes were fixed on Silas. He stood there for a moment, his rifle ready, scanning the canyon mouth. Slowly, his tension eased. He lowered his rifle, his shoulders slumping slightly, not in exhaustion, but in a return to his usual watchful stillness. He didn't look at her immediately. He walked towards the downed horse and rider, a grim task. Alara waited, breathing raggedly. The immediate danger had passed, thanks to him. When he returned, his face was grim beneath his beard, but his eyes held no malice, only a weary resignation. He looked at her then, truly looked at her, for the first time. He saw the lingering fear, the shock, but also something else, the dawning realization of her own survival, of the strength she had found in the face of renewed threat. "It's done," he said, his voice quiet. For now, he didn't offer comfort, still didn't, but his presence, solid and capable, was enough. In that moment, she understood. He wasn't a hero, not in the stories she'd heard. He was simply a man who did what was necessary, facing the harshness of the world with grim determination. And he had chosen, for whatever reason, to face it alongside her. She pushed herself up, her legs still shaky but steadying. She looked at the dead, then back at him. The horror was real, but it no longer held the power to paralyze her. She had survived again, and she had witnessed and benefited from his quiet strength. They didn't speak of it further. They moved on, leaving the scene behind. But something had shifted between them. The shared danger, the stark reality of life and death, had forged a connection stronger than any words. He had been her protector, not out of sentiment, but out of some innate code, some deep-seated sense of purpose she couldn't yet understand. And she, by enduring, by not collapsing, by finding her own small reserve of strength, had shown him that she was not just a burden, but a fellow traveler on this brutal road. They continued their journey, the landscape gradually changing, becoming less stark, more forgiving, though still vast and wild. The harrowing encounter at the canyon had left its mark, a silent acknowledgement of the dangers that still lay ahead, but also a quiet reinforcement of the bond forged in shared peril. Silas remained a man of few words, his actions speaking louder than any dialogue. He still took the lead, still watched over her, but there was a subtle shift in his demeanor, a relaxation of the guardedness that had initially defined him. He still didn't pry, but he listened when she spoke, sometimes offering a brief, insightful comment that showed he heard more than just her words. Alara, in turn, felt the remnants of her fear giving way entirely to respect and a deep, quiet gratitude. She watched him with different eyes now, seeing the weariness that sometimes shadowed his face, the calloused hands that could wield a rifle with deadly accuracy or gently adjust a pack strap. He was not the fallen hero of some grand epic, but a man shaped by hardship, living by his own code in the fringes of the world. And in his quiet strength and unwavering presence, she found a sense of security that no town, no amount of money, could ever provide. She no longer saw herself simply as a survivor of tragedy, a broken thing left behind. The journey, the constant challenge, had stripped away the layers of vulnerability and revealed something resilient and enduring within her. She could face the sun, the wind, the vastness of the land, not without fear, but with a quiet determination that surprised her. She learned to read the signs of the land herself, to conserve water, to find shelter. She was becoming a part of this world, rather than just a fragile trespasser within it. One evening, they came across a small, clear stream, a rare luxury in this arid country. They stopped to rest and replenish their water. As Alara knelt by the stream, filling her canteen, Silas sat a little distance away, cleaning his rifle. The silence between them was no longer awkward or strained, but comfortable, companionable. She looked up, meeting his gaze across the sparkling water. "Thank you," she said simply. It was inadequate, a vast understatement for all he had done, for the life he had saved, for the path he had shared. He held her gaze for a moment, his eyes revealing a flicker of something she couldn't quite name, perhaps understanding, perhaps a reflection of his own long, silent journey. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Just living," he said, his voice low. That was it. Not heroism, not charity, but simply living, surviving, and allowing another to do the same. They didn't speak of the future, of where they were going or what they would do when they reached the edge of this wilderness. The destination felt less important than the journey itself, the shared experience that had transformed them both. Alara knew she would never forget what she had lost. The pain was too deep for that. But she also knew that her life had not ended that terrible day. It had merely been irrevocably changed. She had been stripped bare, left vulnerable, and from that vulnerability, she had found a strength she never knew she possessed. She had faced despair and chosen to crawl towards a light. She had faced fear and chosen to trust. She had faced violence and chosen to endure. And in Silas, the stoic, wounded man who had emerged from the silence to walk beside her, she had found an unexpected partner in survival. They were not bound by love or grand promises, but by the quiet understanding that comes from facing the darkness together and finding, in each other's presence, a reason to keep going. The land stretched out before them, vast and challenging, but no longer utterly terrifying. They would face it together, two resilient souls moving forward, leaving the ghosts of the past behind, step by quiet step.